Welcome to the Capitalist Sage podcast, where we talk to business owners, leaders in the community about things that matter here in Peachtree Corners and surrounding areas. We're to inform people, share information with folks, and just help people understand some of the issues that might be impacting whether it's their lives, their homes, their businesses, and so on. I'm Karl Barham with Transworld Business Advisor, and my co-host is Rico Figliolini with Digital Marketing. Mighty Rockets Digital Marketing, and the publisher of the Peachtree Corner magazine.
Right.
Hey Rico, how you doing today?
Hey Karl, good. Let's talk about some sponsors we have.
Yeah, let's do that.
So let's get that out of the way before we get into with our guest today. So we are at Atlanta Tech Park in the city of Peachtree Corners, and it's actually an accelerator that houses about 90 plus companies. Has a far reach through the southeast because of the venture capital work it does as well, and because of the executive Robin Benfay, who founded this location and this place, and she was an executive with Samsung, BlackBerry, and a few other companies. So we're glad to be here. We're glad they're a sponsor of ours and allow us to use the podcast room. This place is located on Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners, which is about a 1.5 mile autonomous vehicle track that anyone can come to. It's a living lab, essentially. So autonomous vehicles, Internet of Everything, people walking, people driving, everything's live. There's no make-believe here. And you can bring your company, small or large or startup, or established company, and actually test things on this lab, on this 1.5 mile track. And the backbone of this, which is enabled by 5G, Sprint's 5G technology, right?
Yep.
That everyone's talking about, 5G. You can't do autonomous vehicles without 5G. You can't do the Internet of Everything without that. But you got to bring the Internet to it, though, right? And so you still got to use cable and fiber to be able to do that. And our lead sponsor is Hargray Fiber, and they're the backbone of Curiosity Lab at Peachtree Corners. They actually provide the fiber for this to be able to work this 1.5 mile track.
It's incredible the technology that's already being deployed right here in Peachtree Corners to enable smart city applications, everything from e-scooters where you can get on the scooter, that driverless shuttles, both the backbone that's being built and the Sprint 5G network is enabling that. So a lot of companies are coming into this area to explore their technologies.
Tremendous amount. Almost like, better than Planet M in Michigan. We got the place to be. So if you want to find out about Atlanta Tech Park, it's atlantatechpark.com, hargrayfiber.com if you're a small business or an enterprise-sized business and you're looking for fiber and enterprise solutions, they're the people to go to.
Well, today we have a special episode of Capitalist Sage where one of the things we like to do is share the different types of leaders and people, thought leaders in the community that's helped contributing to the success of our community, whether it's through business, whether it's through government, whether it's through citizenship and private individuals. And today it's my pleasure to welcome Carolyn Bourdeaux from running for the U.S. Senate seat here.
Congress.
The U.S. Congress.
7th
Congressional District here in Georgia. Hi, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thank you all for having me.
Sure, it's a pleasure, actually. Second time
Second time?
for us, yes. When you ran back in 2018?
18, yep.
Yeah.
I'm back to finish the job.
Oh, fabulous.
Good.
So one of the things we wanted to start off with just kind of reintroduce you to folks that may not know who you are and kind of learn a little bit why are you jumping into this and serving your country by running for Congress.
Right. So a little bit of my background. I live in Swanee. I have my husband and I, we have an 8-year-old son who's enrolled in public schools here. My day job is I teach at the Andrew Young School of Policy Studies at Georgia State. I teach public policy and public finance, and have spent a lot of my life working in various roles in public service. I worked for several members of Congress, for U.S. Senator. I was director of the Senate Budget and Evaluation Office here in Georgia. I founded the Center for State and Local Finance, and so have been in public life and in public service in many ways for a long time. I got into this race back in July of 2017 and was motivated by several things, but one of the big ones was healthcare and what's happened with healthcare reform in this country. And my parents passed away 2 years ago after my father, after a really prolonged illness, and all of the discretionary income was eaten up paying for healthcare costs. And so watching the skyrocketing prices of prescription drugs, the extortionary rates that many of us pay for health insurance in this community. We have 110,000 people without health insurance. And so that was a big driver, sort of watching the destruction of the Affordable Care Act and just sort of the many, many issues that many of us face in healthcare.
Yeah. That was a big issue at the time, still is. Right?
It still is very pressing.
It actually is very topical because, you know, as you hear more about other countries battling health concerns and so on, what are some of the things you've seen in other countries that might help us look at healthcare and how we do it here differently?
Right. So I'll start with healthcare generally, and you know, most other countries have some form of universal health care, and they have different ways that they're trying to get there. They use different strategies. The one I talk about a lot is, you know, going back, standing the Affordable Care Act back up, actually implementing that legislation. A lot of pieces of that were never implemented, including the expansion of Medicaid here in Georgia. By not expanding Medicaid in Georgia, the state basically returns to the federal government between $2.2 and $3 billion a year.
That's voluntary too, I think.
It is voluntary, yeah. So
we voluntarily turned away $2 billion.
$2 billion a year, at least, you know, as much as $3 billion now. And that means that around 500,000 people in the state don't have health insurance now. And that's a lot of people to hang out to dry. I also am someone who thinks we need a public option on the exchange. That won't cover everybody. And we need a low-cost alternative for small businesses and for individuals to opt into as well.
How do you feel about, with everything that's going on? I mean, there's podcasts galore now and shows about coronavirus, the novel virus.
Yeah.
The pandemic, according to CDC, WHO will probably happen. It is expanding. You can get the test maybe if you're lucky and someone's going to pay for it. But if you want to get the test, I mean, there's so many questions about who's going to actually pay for it.
Yeah.
And how are you going to take care of hospital bills if you're actually infected badly and you have to go to the hospital?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
So we just saw a story in Florida where a person thought they had, you know, some kind of coronavirus. They went to the hospital and then were immediately slapped with a $2,000 bill for it.
Right.
I think one of the things about coronavirus is it really, the COVID-19, is it really shines a bright light on some really serious problems in this country. And one of them is that we have hundreds of thousands of people, we have millions of people in this state, over 1 million people without health insurance. And, you know, even if you're not worried about them, you might be worried about yourself, because it would be really helpful if they feel sick, if they can see a doctor. And so I think it is, you know, we face a situation where we may be in real trouble because we still, after years of arguing about this, still do not provide health care and access to a doctor for many, many people in our community.
And for the people that need it, that can't afford it, then are not going to go because they can't afford to pay it. I mean,
exactly, yeah. They are much less likely to go. And I think, you know, we talk about the response to coronavirus, and people are like, well, you know, don't touch your face, or be sure to wash your hands.
Yes, there's only so many times.
That's right. I mean, and that's good. That's important. But we also have to recognize that the response also needs to address the gaping holes in our, I don't want to say safety net, because we think of that as being associated with poor people. But we all need a safety net at different times. Another huge issue is paid family medical leave. We have lots of people in our community who live paycheck to paycheck. What are they going to do if they are quarantined? We have lots of people who don't have any kind of paid family medical leave, and they need, you know, that money. What are they going to do? And so when we talk about how we respond to the pandemic, we need to think not just about sort of those basic health care, washing your hands, those kinds of things, but also how as a society do we respond to it?
Well, the economic impact that it's going to have.
If you think about it, some simple math, if as people start getting sick, they're going to flood emergency rooms.
Yes.
And the cost of servicing that many people is gonna really be huge.
Not just the cost, but there won't be enough beds, enough ventilators, enough equipment, enough safety equipment for the healthcare workers. I mean, can you imagine?
Yeah.
1,000 people showing up at Emory, maybe?
So there's going to be an economic impact. The question is, can you plan ahead and spend the money wisely so that people can go earlier before it requires an emergency room, get treatment, get.
Is $8 billion enough? I mean, I don't know.
I think it's a start, and we're going to have to take this one step at a time. But there are many tiers to this issue, right? One is sort of the, how do we deal with this as a society? There's another is, how is our healthcare network going to deal with it? And obviously we really have to try to protect our healthcare workers. And we saw thousands and thousands of them in China get sick from the COVID-19. And we're going to have to think about that. And do we have what they need to be supported? Mm-hmm. And one thing I see when a lot of folks are talking about, it's a small percentage of people who die from this or need hospitalization. Our problem is that even a small percentage of a large number can quickly overwhelm our hospitals. And one of the reasons we quarantine and kind of shut things down is not because, it's going to wipe out and kill lots of people. It's just that we have to stop that overwhelming of our healthcare system and try to manage, how the disease is unfolding. And so, I know there are good people thinking about this. I just hope, that they have a voice in this process and are able to help us manage through.
So I'm always curious about the impact for small business owners. So I saw a statistic, 44% or so of people are employed by small business. The 99.7% of all businesses happen to be small businesses, and they may not have the ability to extend large company healthcare benefits that people get to enjoy. What are some of the strategies that business owners at least have available to them, and what can they do to get their voice heard to help drive change so that they can offer their employees better options?
Well, again, there's sort of the immediate crisis issue, right? And then there's the bigger picture issue. And, for me, ensuring that we have, some form of universal health care coverage is a small business issue, right? And we need to do it to protect our small businesses so that they are not being crushed by the burden of health insurance and healthcare coverage, and that they can provide that for their employees. So, one of the many reasons I really advocate for that is because I hear from small businesses all the time and how they really struggle to get insurance for themselves and for their employees. The immediate crisis is, I think folks need to start advocating with the state government and with the federal government to, get some real solutions coming down the pike, some real ideas for what is going to happen and how we are going to manage through this if this happens, and how we're going to protect small businesses. I think that is an issue, and I don't think it's really been addressed.
Yeah, and I hear it often when I talk to small business owners. They are doing what they need to do to survive first, and they're one catastrophe or something away from really losing their business very often. If I could ask a little bit, so as we see problems like this, and healthcare is a big one, there's a lot of others like that. What are ways that the two parties can work together to come to solution? There seems to be a blockage of that used to exist many years ago, but it's getting more polarized, and we're not seeing people come together. Have you seen hope that could be improved?
I wish I could say yes, but it's a tough situation we're in. I have worked with Republicans, in the past when I worked in Congress I worked for a Democratic Senator, Ron Wyden. Every single piece of legislation I worked on had Republican co-sponsors. I think that coming together is very, very important. But I think our first step is we need to agree that everybody needs health insurance and have some basic fundamental agreement on those issues, and the electorate needs to send that message that that's something they want. And then there are lots of ways to solve that problem, I think, in ways that, Republicans might agree with. Actually, the Affordable Care Act, right, was originally introduced in Massachusetts by Mitt Romney. Mm-hmm. It was a Republican idea. It was a bipartisan idea, and we need to go back to that time when we can have that kind of conversation.
It was a bit of a moderate Republican idea that they disowned later, though.
Right.
So I don't know if they'll ever go back to that.
Yeah.
At least this set of Republicans.
Yeah,
Right.
it's very unfortunate. It was a market-based idea for trying to address, get us to universal health coverage.
So how do you find then, for example, right now, Senator Warren decided to bow out at this point today. Made sense. I mean, she just had no path to go.
Yeah.
So we have two. I mean, there might be a third one, a Tulsi, but she's like 2% or something. So there's really two candidates, right? Two different plans. One wants all. It's like almost all or nothing. So where do we go from this? If between the two of them, between Biden and Sanders?
Right.
I mean, I feel the burn, but I don't know if I can go all the way there. But how do you feel about that?
When I talk to people in the district, and I have spent a lot of time talking to people about this issue, we start with where we want to go. And I think it's the same issue as we try to, bring, Republicans along and have a bigger coalition around it. Everybody wants affordable, quality health care. We all want that. We all need that. We need that for our families, for our businesses, for our community. How we get there, we can come up with different ways to get there. Again, I think we already have a law on the books. That's the most straightforward way. I do believe in fiscal responsibility, and the public option has been shown to save money. I think we can come up with ways to get there, whether it is, a Sanders way, a Biden way. We all have to focus on the goal of where we want to go and then work our way through how we are going to get there.
Very often you'll see, different strategies play out in public policy. How do you get grassroots involvement on an issue like this? How do you mobilize people to really get out there, and what specifically can people do to, whether their representative is Republican or Democrat, get them to look at an issue in a bipartisan way?
Yeah. I'm a big believer in education and having dialogue with folks. The most difficult policy issue I ever addressed was helping the state balance the budget during the Great Recession. And it was a really tough time. Georgia's revenues dropped by 20%. And what I did, and many other policymakers did, was we did public forum after public forum after public forum, showing what was happening with the state revenues, showing how we are going to try to address this issue. And I think we need to have something similar on healthcare, where we are just out there talking to folks. And I, as part of the campaign, I do hundreds of community meetings, and and we talk about these kinds of issues. And I think that's very, very important for people having a chance to kind of hash out those ideas in a community.
Let me ask you about technology. We talk about business a lot on this podcast, but recently Google was found to have been working with a healthcare provider that does the back office work, if you will. So they've been accumulating data, and not just generic data, but names and everything like that. It's coming to the forefront now. Google, Facebook, I mean, they're all in there in the mix. Apple's doing stuff, but Google is the biggest gorilla in the room, if you will. How do you want to deal with technology where, on the one hand, something like that can actually help during a crisis like an epidemic, or can help bring down costs? But you have to share that. You have to either get rid of the privacy, limit the privacy. I mean, it's very shaky. How do you handle that in this new age? I mean, what do you do?
It's particularly an interesting question for me, because as somebody who does research around public policy, I see the enormous power of data and how it can really help us fine-tune public policies to have a much more significant impact. So, for instance, Georgia State uses analytics to try to target students who might be more likely to drop out of school and then intervene early before they run into problems. And they've been enormously successful with this. They've been really very successful at driving up their graduation rates. So I see both sides of it. On the other hand, I'm a pretty passionate advocate for privacy. And, it's just a personal thing. I don't want everybody knowing every click I made and every location I have been.
Right.
And I would imagine most of us don't. And you have these, very large companies now. You have maybe the government as well, just collecting tremendous amounts of data on us. So I am interested in looking at ways where we do put some brackets around this, where you see Europe and California now have passed legislation
Stunning.
laws,
Mm-hmm.
to if you do collect data, it really does have to be anonymous. There have to be a lot of protections around it. As an individual, you need to know what data is being collected, and you're allowed to inquire and
Right.
and find out about it, and that's very important. And as a citizen, you're also allowed to say, I want you to get rid of all the data that would identify me. And so I think legislation around that is coming, and we do need to think about how we're leveraging its power, but at the same time protecting privacy. So you're not able to identify individuals and really drill down in a way that can be very damaging to someone should information get out.
Could be. I mean, we look at China, and we look the way they locked down Wuhan and the province. In a country like that, can't do that because there's no privacy. There's no privacy issue. They can lock it down and just stop. And if we can believe their rates of infection, it's way less now than it used to be. Than it was 4 weeks ago. Yeah.
I'm curious if I could ask a little bit about education.
Yeah.
You work a lot with students and folks that are going for. I see now the emphasis on education kind of getting de-emphasized in a lot of circles. There was a time where we led with educating everyone, free education. It was maybe a national security issue, as well as a way for economic advancement. And now there's a lot of people, they're paying for colleges getting expensive, and you've got some candidates that are, everyone should be able to go to college for free, and most jobs are now requiring that. How do we balance or rebalance our focus around educating our young?
So this is a district where we care a lot about education. This is the 7th district is about families and children and raising our children and giving them access to the American dream and the opportunity. And I would venture to say that most all of us agree that one of the keys to that is having a really good education. I do think we have taken our eye off the ball there. And when I left Georgia State, one of the things I was working on was looking at currently about 40% of young people in Georgia get some sort of higher education, whether it's through our technical schools or through colleges and universities. To compete with countries like Korea and Canada and Japan, we need 60% to get through. That's a big shift. I think I calculated back of the envelope, it would mean investing around $1 billion more in our public universities in Georgia to get to that. So we spend, I think, around $2 billion in state funds on our universities. So that's an enormous jump in investment that we would need. We need to start thinking about that. I generally am not a free person, but I am an affordable person. And when I graduated from college, I had a tremendous amount of student debt. It is a big part of my story, and so I'm deeply sympathetic to young people who have that ball and chain around their ankle. And so it needs to be within reach of every student who wants to go to get a higher education. They should not see cost as a barrier.
That's one of the things now. I feel there's a generation from 2005 to probably 2015 that went to college during the economic crisis. When they came out, they were probably underemployed because of the economy. And I feel there were at least 5 years behind where previous generations or peers were. And I don't know if they ever caught up. Or at least they haven't caught up yet. They might have
maturity-wise, or
economically, where they're getting married at 27 to 33 and buying the first house. They're delaying starting a family by 5-6 years because they're still paying off student debt and those types of things. What can we do, for that group that's now getting older? And what do we do to prevent that if that were to happen again, so many folks don't get left behind?
Yeah, so we have, we have not made the baseline investments in programs that are used to reduce the cost of higher education. I went to school on Pell Grants, and I don't think we've increased the Pell Grants in almost a decade instead of what that covers. we have disinvested in our public universities. In 2007 or so, around 75% of the revenues for our public universities, 75% came from tax dollars, came from our investment, 25% came from tuition. Now it is below 50% comes from sort of the state, guarantee or the state input, and over 50% comes from tuition. And we've seen that in dramatic jumps in the tuition. So one of the big things we need to do also is just reinvest in those public universities so that they are affordable. You don't go to them and you have, some people have hundreds of thousands, but a lot of, $20,000, $30,000 in debt when you leave. So those are certainly some things we can do to try to address that. I'm interested in some of the loan forgiveness as well. I think, there are a lot of folks out there who have a lot of earning potential, right? And it's not going to be a big issue.
Right.
But, for lower income folks, people who choose service jobs, people who choose jobs that are, in the community that might not make as much, pegging their student loan repayments to a smaller percentage of their income is certainly something we can do. Forgiveness, for people who go into.
So that would be changing really what's going on now, right? Because the education department now had a program of forgiveness for a certain set of people that applied, and supposedly that's not happening anymore.
They've undone it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I am running. I deeply disagree with the priorities,
Yeah.
right, that we're setting right now nationally.
Even folks that go into a field like teaching are leaving because the
can't.
salaries they're making, they can't live. And anyone here could tell you and remember a teacher that probably changed the course of your life because of the way they were able to impact you.
Well, they even spend their own money. I mean, most of them do, to buy stuff for the classroom and things.
I tell folks, the most important person in my life right now is not some Wall Street banker. It's not. It is my son's second grade teacher. And we need to treat her and pay her and support her accordingly.
Do you think Sandra's been talking a little bit more, I think, about free, but everything could be free, I guess, but free childcare, and talking about providing that childcare, and also making pre-kindergarten, putting an investment in the lower grades to hopefully bring, because it is a big difference, I think, if for a kid that's young, that doesn't get taught well, that doesn't have the right exposure. I mean, what do you think about that?
So I do support moving towards universal pre-K and making that available, not mandatory, right? But that anybody who wants to does have access, just like we have kindergarten, move that down a grade. And that's important. But we need affordable childcare too. There are lots of women, we want people to work. Okay, if you want people to work, then you need to support them as they do work. And, having quality childcare is also extremely important.
You're running as a Democrat, and I'm curious, are there things that you see the Republican Party doing well in policy? Something where you think they're on the right path and they might be leading the way in any particular area of policy currently?
I think there's a lot of good bipartisan work around the VA and around veterans issues. That's something where we have a situation that is quite bad in the VA. I talked to lots of veterans who have had to wait years. I had a friend whose brother killed himself as he came back and didn't get the mental health treatment that he needed. And I see people in both parties, working together to address those issues, and those are very important ones, and I'm glad to see them, move forward on a bipartisan basis.
I wonder, issues like immigration. There's a lot of polarizing opinions about it, but you do hear some talk of finding ways to bring more people to be naturalized citizens or to become citizens within the country. I hear it on both sides. Republicans talk about it. They seem to get stuck in how and when and the pace to do it. But our approach to immigration has drastically shifted in 30 years, where I grew up in New York and there was a Statue of Liberty, and I remember it on school trips. It was bring me your poor and arms opening and there's been a shift, and I don't know if it's a shift in the people, Is it a shift in the policy?
Oh, well, I mean, I think Trump clearly ran on a huge anti-immigrant platform. And the 7th Congressional District, 25% of the people in this district were born outside of this country. And it is the policies coming out of Washington now around immigration just strike at the heart of this district. And it is interesting, the business community needs immigrants. And we have always benefited from bringing the best and the brightest from all over the world, hard workers from all over the world coming to our country and making a life for themselves and their families. And, we have rolled that back. And I was interested to see Mick Mulvaney out there the other day. I guess he slipped up and, and said that, wait a minute, these really do have a big economic impact. Mm-hmm. If you all will recall, back in 2007, Georgia passed a huge anti-immigrant piece of legislation, and it's kind of evaporated. And what they found was right away, after they passed it, hundreds of millions of dollars of crops rotted in the fields in South Georgia. And, so it's this weird dichotomy. They're like, we don't want immigrants, but then, once that kind of furor passes, oh, wait, we really do need them.
I don't know how they would not realize that, right?
I don't know, but it, and then the legislation kind of, it was found, to be unconstitutional or illegal in various ways and kind of vanished. We're going to see that same thing cycle again. And one of the problems we have is that our immigration laws do not match the economic realities on the ground, and we need to have that match. I mean, the other thing about immigration is that, we are now, we're a country that deeply believes in human rights and respect for human dignity. And to see what's happening at the border with these camps and, taking children away from their parents, everybody's a parent, just feels that in their guts. How wrong that is. And we have just lost our moral bearings now around immigration. And that fundamentally has to be reestablished. I was just in a Hispanic church a few weekends ago and sat down with a man whose brother was here. He ran a landscaping business, in our community right here. And his wife, for some reason, ended up being undocumented, was deported by ICE back to Honduras. And he followed her back and was shortly thereafter killed. His hands were chopped off, his head was chopped off, and his wife was raped. And we're sending people back to their countries and they're being killed. And that's really, really wrong. And we have to address that, both the moral, the human rights issues, as well as the economic ones in our immigration policy.
There's a lot that's going on here in Metro Atlanta when if you go to areas like Clarkston and others, where you're seeing, I'd call a rebirth. The immigrant communities building businesses there. There's a program there called Start Me with Emory, where they're partnering with the universities and Friends of Refugees and nonprofit organizations in the community to help new Americans and refugees build businesses here in the community. And it's amazing when you see folks that have the ability, and all they might need is some help and guidance on navigating. There might be some language skills that they need some help with, but they're putting out good business, catering businesses and restaurants and clothing businesses and so on, because they want to provide, they want to create jobs within the community and make sure the money stays within the community. So, if folks want to get a sense of how immigrants are thriving, there's areas right here in Metro Atlanta that they can go and experience that if they want to kind of just meet someone, have lunch, have coffee, and it changes your perception of.
And it's not a zero-sum game, right? They are creating business and opportunity, and that in turn is lifting everybody up. And I think that's another important point, about immigrants coming into our community. They bring a tremendous amount of economic growth and vibrancy to our community.
We got a few minutes left, and then we got to let Carolyn go. But I want to get, if you don't mind, just a couple of questions in about politics, right?
Okay.
Not just about issues. But so we have Sanders and we have Biden. Do you have a choice?
No, I'm.
You're going to stay out of that one.
I'm staying out of that, yeah.
As far as down there, they've been talking about Sanders and down the ticket, how that may affect other candidates. You have six, I think, running in the Democratic primary, right?
Mhm.
And there's 7 candidates in the Republican, so they're having a free for all on the other side.
Mhm.
But you've raised the most money
Mhm.
in this primary. Do you feel good about winning?
I do, yeah. I come in with, I came within 433 votes
Yes,
last time of flipping the
right.
seat. It was the closest race in the country.
Yeah.
And, I'm starting at, with tremendous momentum coming out of that. I think a lot of folks saw what we accomplished in 2018 and saw it as a victory. I mean, we closed a 20 percentage point gap in this area to get to that point. The previous Democrat came in at 40%. And so, that enthusiasm, momentum, and excitement, it is reflected in my fundraising numbers, right? Those are
I saw that.
not
Quite a bit of money.
and,
Yes.
but also in the endorsements. I just picked up Hakeem Jeffries, Congressman Hakeem Jeffries' endorsement. He is a rising star in the House leadership, Democratic House leadership. I have John Lewis, Andrew Young, Hank Johnson,
Right.
Sam Nunn, a host of local folks, and it's just, we are coming back to finish what we started last time.
How do you feel about Kelly Loeffler?
Oh, bless her heart. Welcome to politics.
All right, I guess we'll leave it there.
All right.
Thank you,
All right.
Carol. I appreciate you coming down with us. Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely. Just getting to talk to folks and getting to hear more about what you think about policies and issues that are affecting people every day. Thank you very much for coming and joining us today.
All right. Well, it's a real pleasure
Same
to
here.
talk with you guys.
Same here.
Well, Bob, we want to thank everybody for listening to the Capitalist Sage podcast today. I'm Karl Barham with Transworld Business Advisors. We help business folks figure out exit strategies for businesses. Rico, what do you have coming up?
Sure. So Peachtree Corners Magazine, if you go to livinginpeachtreecorners.com, you can find out all about what's going on in the city. But the next issue is about youth sports,
Love it.
about doing good with homegrown nonprofits, and a few other stories. So we're chock full of stuff. So that'll be coming out, and that'll be the April-May issue. So April 10th, right after spring break ends, is when that's coming out.
And I'm going to suspect in the next few weeks and months, there's going to be lots of activity here in Atlanta Tech Park.
Yes.
Our sponsor and where we broadcast this podcast from, part of the city of Peachtree Corners, Georgia. We want to be a place where business people can come together,
Absolutely.
interact with people in politics and the community to help make what the city's really all about. So I want to thank Atlanta Tech Park and invite anybody to come out here and take a look whenever they have a chance.
Cool.
And for that's the end of this week's podcast at the Capitalist Sage. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Take care.
Thank you.